And we are live.
All right, welcome back. This is Senate Health and Welfare. We are returning to testimony on S25. And before we introduce our next witness, I'm going to go around the table, beginning with Senator Bullock, and introduce ourselves.
Hello, Senator Martine Bullock from Burlington, Vermont.
Good morning, Dave Weeds, representing Rutland County.
Ginny Lyons, representing Chittenden Southeast and chairing the committee.
Jerry Williams from Rutland County also.
Good morning.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for being here. So please introduce yourself for the record, and we do welcome listening to your testimony.
Thank you. My name is Avinash Kaur. I'm a senior attorney and senior director for health and food with the Natural Resources Defense Council. I lead NRDC state health policy work and have been very involved with policies to eliminate toxic forever PFAS chemicals in various product categories, including in textiles in California and New York. Would you like me to go ahead with my testimony at this point?
Yes, please, go right ahead.
Great, thank you. I am pleased to see Vermont considering the elimination of PFAS in clothing and textiles. PFAS, short for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, are a class of thousands of man-made chemicals. They are harmful to health and the environment, can stick around in the environment for very long periods of time, and they should be eliminated from the products that come into our homes and workplaces whenever possible. They are used primarily for water and stain resistance in clothing and textiles, and their use in textiles can result in exposures throughout the life cycle of apparel and textile products. Phasing them out will eliminate a significant source of PFAS exposure and contamination. And at this point, I'd like to briefly share a couple of graphics to illustrate how textiles add to and contribute to PFAS exposures, if you'll give me just a minute. So as you can see, just a second, sorry. PFAS are just one source of many exposures we have every day to, textiles is just one source of exposure to PFAS that we have every day in our lives. We're exposed to PFAS in multiple products that come into our homes and that we're encountering in our daily lives. And then secondly, I wanted to just show you the ways that PFAS-coated apparel can lead to contamination of water sources. And you can see from every stage of production to disposal, you can get exposures to PFAS and contamination of water sources from PFAS in textiles. I'll also add that some studies suggest that there might be dermal exposures, dermal absorption of PFAS through textiles, and finally that PFAS can end up in your household dust from clothing, and that can be another source of exposure. So in terms of regulating PFAS in clothing and textiles, PFAS are not needed in clothing and textiles, and manufacturers and brands will already have to comply with requirements in California, in New York, and elsewhere, phasing out PFAS in apparel and other textiles. California enacted a law last September banning PFAS in most clothing and textiles starting in 2025. New York followed suit in December on apparel, with the governor and legislature agreeing on a bill that adopts the same timeline. Under both California and New York's language, a narrow category of products, outdoor apparel for severe wet conditions that are not marketed to the general consumer, will have until 2028 to come into compliance, but must disclose that they are made with PFAS chemicals between 2025 and 2028. Vermont may want to consider this narrow extension for consistency. I'll also note that the California timeline is designed to allow for a reasonable transition period and a long enough timeline to allow businesses to adapt and sell products that have been produced. Otherwise, the deadline may have been more rapid. Separate sell-through dates are problematic for several reasons. They can be confusing for consumers and for enforcement. They keep products that can lead to exposures or contaminate water sources in circulation for longer, and they create perverse incentives for stockpiling, that is, producing an excess of products that can continue to be sold through. We therefore usually recommend against separate sell-through dates, especially given the generous transition period that's already provided for in the 2025 timeline. And I'll note that California and New York acted because numerous leading brands across the textiles category had already either eliminated PFAS in their products or had committed to eliminating PFAS before the deadlines of the laws. And because alternatives are available and feasible, companies that had already moved out of PFAS or had commitments at the time the California and New York laws passed included Levi's, IKEA, Keen, Gap, Zara, Patagonia, Jack Wolfskin, Osprey, and many others. Indeed, IKEA and Patagonia supported the California bill. Recently, REI, the biggest outdoor retailer in the US, announced a PFAS ban on all products, including winter gear, with timelines that align with California law. California saw that the leaders in the industry were already moving, that alternatives were available, and that the rest of the industry needed to be brought along to address the PFAS crisis. Since the passage of the law, many certifications, including BlueSign, Oikotex, and Affirm, have established standards limiting PFAS in clothing and textiles at levels similar to or below the thresholds in California's law. Vermont may want to consider similar thresholds to facilitate enforcement. I know that Vermont already banned PFAS from ski wax in 2021, noting the link between ski resorts and water systems with high levels of PFAS. Banning PFAS from clothing and textiles will further protect these communities by reducing the PFAS contamination of their water systems. PFAS are not needed in clothing and textiles. Companies are already moving to eliminate these harmful chemicals from their products and will have to comply with requirements to remove them in other states. They should have no problem meeting the same requirements for Vermont. Vermont should act to protect its residents and its environment from these chemicals and phase them out of clothing and textiles. We ask for your aye vote on S25. Thank you. And if there's any questions I can answer, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive and complete and succinct. Appreciate your testimony and how you've given it. We don't have your testimony in writing to put on our webpage, and it would be terrific if you could please send that to Alex.
I'd be happy to do so.
Oh, terrific. That's wonderful. And just as an FYI, we are trying to resolve the differences between the bill and what California has done. You know, the transition, the date of 2028 in particular. So your comments resonate with us. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, I'll just note that that's a narrow exception, and we made, we recognize in that process that for those very narrow category of products, there are some outstanding issues to getting the phase out done. And we wanted to make sure that these were products that were not sold to the general consumer.
Yeah, and I'm fortunate. I have an REI in my town, and it's great to know that they are, from my own personal perspective, I think it's great. So it's good. Senator Gulick and then Senator Weeks each have questions for you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As I'm listening to all of this testimony, I'm beginning to wonder about organic fabrics. And my general question is, can we assume that organic fabrics are free of toxins, PFAS among others?
I'm afraid not necessarily, because the way that PFAS is often applied to clothing, for instance, many of the products that are stain resistant or water resistant, they'll be made from a particular fabric. It could be made from organic fabric and then have a layer of PFAS applied to provide. I'm an attorney, so I don't know the technical term for how it's attached, but basically the PFAS is added to the product to provide the water or stain resistance. So the fabric may be organic, but that does not mean that it is necessarily free of all toxins and chemicals.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Weeks.
No, that was it.
That was it. That was a great question.
Yeah, Avi, earlier this morning, we had a testimony from a gentleman who represented the motorcycle safety equipment organization. And he recommended that that safety equipment be included in the exclusion of clothing items, textiles, which that this bill affects. I'm wondering, as a textile expert, or at least representing the textile industry, if you would agree that such an exclusion would be necessary, or if, given a window in front of us of whatever it might be, 5 years, would be satisfactory to, for that industry to adapt as well to non-PFAS contaminated clothing or textiles.
Thank you for the question. I would just like to first correct something. I don't represent the textile industry and wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to claim that. I work for environmental nonprofit, and I work on environmental policy issues, and textiles happens to be one of the issues I worked on. So in terms of the period of transition, all these industries were at the table. We made specific exclusions in the law for various transportation oriented fabrics. You'll notice, and I think Vermont has adopted them in the language as well, in terms of exclusions for automobiles and aircraft and so forth. And there is an exclusion for personal protective equipment that is necessary for work and to provide safety for workers and others. California determined that an additional timeline was not necessary for any products that are not covered in the law, that didn't have either exclusions or extensions provided for in the law. So, all that we understand PFAS to provide in clothing and textiles, the primary reasons they're used is water and stain resistance, which does not appear to implicate safety. So our understanding is that an additional timeline for these motorcycle products is not necessary, unless it's covered by the automobile extension already. So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Good. Terrific. And so we look forward to seeing your testimony in writing, and we'll post it up so we can have it available. I appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
That's great. Okay. So it is 1:15, and Katie is going to be with us at 10:30. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is accurate.
So what I'm going to suggest is we've heard a lot of testimony, and when Katie comes in, we'll go through S25, and then we'll look at S56 together, because Katie does have a new draft of S25 based on the testimony that we heard yesterday. There might be some fine tuning we do based on what we heard today. So let's do that. We'll take a break for 15 minutes, and then we'll be back with Katie and Zoom. So